And of course, the Henry Ford exhibits, Henry Ford Museum would not be complete without a relatively sizable car exhibit, and that's what this is here. This is a cross-section of a Model T. And then over top there is a recreation of what the Ford assembly line looked like. So this is a little exhibit about the cars, but the thing we're going to go over to is over this way. It's down here, so we're going to take a walk down here. And you can see up top above the cars is the presidential seal. And if you know what the Henry Ford collection contains, you know where we're headed here. Some presidential cars, including one in particular. So these are presidential limousines. This one is Ronald Reagan's. It's a 1972 Lincoln, used from 1972 to 1992. Actually, what I should do is I should probably go to the back, start at the beginning of this exhibit. We've got some more cars over here. We'll probably have the camera on for some of these other methods of transportation, but I'm pointing the camera down in particular because I don't want to spoil the fun, because we're going to start at the beginning of the presidential car exhibit and go to the end. So we're going to walk all the way down here to the end, and we'll start at the back end here. And there's a lot of other cars we're going to look at here, probably, including this one here. This one here really pisses me off. I'll explain why when we get to that section. But this is the presidential cars are on this side over here. So this is the first one. This one here. This is Teddy Roosevelt. Teddy Roosevelt's presidential vehicle. I don't say car because it's not a car. It is a buggy, horse-drawn carriage. But this is Teddy Roosevelt's presidential vehicle. Relatively standard black horse-drawn carriage. Nothing too crazy. May have been, I assume it was probably top of the line when it was made, but it is nothing really crazy about it. It is just a horse-drawn carriage, but it is a horse-drawn carriage that pulled Teddy Roosevelt. Automobiles were a thing when Teddy Roosevelt was president, but he wasn't a big fan of cars. He was famously not real thrilled with the idea of a horseless carriage. So he usually got pulled around in a horse-drawn carriage. So that's the first one. Up here, this is FDR, Franklin Delano Roosevelt's presidential car. This one is a little bit different because Franklin Roosevelt was in a wheelchair. So they had a lot of extra room back here for him to sit in the wheelchair and to have the wheelchair back there with him. The doors are wider. It opens like this so he can get the wheelchair in. But this is a massive car. This is an absolutely monster of a car. Let's see if it says on the sign what year this is. This is a 1939 Lincoln, used from 1939 to 1950. So I guess that would be who? Truman and Eisenhower used this car as well. But this was made for FDR, and it does have some specific things for FDR. It's just a monster of a car. This thing's got to be 30 feet long. I mean, it's just a massive car. Probably got lovely gas mileage, but there is a lot more room in the back for Roosevelt's wheelchair, because he was in a wheelchair. He had polio in, I think, in the late 20s, early 30s, before he was president. He took great pains as president to hide the fact that he was paralyzed. He had braces, and when he would walk in public, he would have people supporting him, and basically all he was doing was locking the brace and throwing his leg out in front of him and landing on it and counting on the brace to stop his leg from buckling underneath him, and he was leaning heavily on the people with him. Specifically, one of his kids spent a lot of his young adulthood supporting his dad as he pretended to walk in public, because nobody wanted to have a crippled president, a paralyzed president. This car is, let's see who this is. I forget. I think this might be Nixon. Let's see. This is Eisenhower. a 1950 Lincoln. Open top car. That stopped with the next car in the line, which we'll talk about in a minute. But 1950 Lincoln, this is Eisenhower's presidential limousine. And another monster of a car. It's just giant piles of steel. Eisenhower was open top, and he had a jump seat right there, and then more people could sit back there. And this, he could stand up, and this was a windshield, so when he was standing up, waving to crowds and such, he wouldn't get bugs in his teeth. But yeah, this is President Eisenhower's presidential car. And then here comes the next one. And this is kind of the highlights, probably the wrong word, but this is the center of this particular exhibit. We'll start with the back of it here, and you probably know whose car this is. But on the back here, they've got running boards and handles. There would be Secret Service agents standing on these platforms, and as the car was driving. This particular car belonged to President Kennedy. And President Kennedy had this car in Dallas, Texas in November of 1963. And this is the car that President Kennedy was killed in. And one of the things I find really creepy about this car, it's a 1961 Lincoln. Kennedy was killed in November of 1963. The car was used until 1977, which means that this car was used as the presidential car for 14 years after the president was murdered in it. I think that having the president be killed in the car would probably be a good reason to retire the car. I clearly would be wrong. But this is the car, and then you notice that the car, it's not a convertible, it's not an open top. It was an open-top car when Kennedy was killed in it, and after Kennedy was killed in it, they stopped having the president run around in open-top cars. What a novel concept. But that seat right there is the seat that John F. Kennedy was killed in. I forget the guy's name. The governor of Texas, Connally, was sitting in that seat. Jacqueline Kennedy was sitting in that seat, and the president was sitting in this seat, and that's where he was killed. And the famous film of the Kennedy assassination shows him getting killed here, and Jacqueline Kennedy reaching over onto the trunk to pick up a piece of skull that had been blown off of the president, while there were Secret Service agents jumping up on these running boards and holding onto these things as the car took off to the hospital. A couple of years ago, I was in Dealey Plaza in Dallas, Texas, and got to see some of the sites where President Kennedy was killed. And this is the car he was killed in. And not only was he killed in it, when he was killed in it, they cleaned all the brains off of it, put a top on it because, hey, maybe we shouldn't have the president running around in a convertible, and continued to use it through 1977, which would be who? Carter? Yeah, Carter. Carter was 76, I think he was elected. So they used this thing for another damn near 20 years after Kennedy was killed in it. I think if I were LBJ or Nixon or Ford or Carter or any of these other presidents, I'd say, hey, you know what? I don't want to use the car that Kennedy was killed in. But they did. So this is the car that John F. Kennedy was killed in that seat right there. Yeah, kind of a strange thing. I don't know. Using the car that he was killed in afterwards. And then this is Ronald Reagan's car. This is the one we started out with, and I kind of stopped in the middle to go back to the beginning. But this is Ronald Reagan's presidential car. Another massive car. If you notice, all of these cars are none of these cars are fuel efficient. And this one I think is a Cadillac. This looks like I think that's a Cadillac logo. Oh no, that's a Lincoln too, isn't it? Yeah, it's a Lincoln too. So most of these cars are Lincolns. Apparently that's the official car of the president, is the Lincolns. But this is Reagan's car, and no top down. And I think I read somewhere, let's see if it's on this sign. I read somewhere that this car is like very, very bulletproof. This is the car he went into. Okay, so This is the car they loaded Reagan into after he was shot in 1981. Let's see. The right side of the car behind the rear door where the bullet ricocheted off and hit Reagan. Body damage now repaired. Well, behind the rear door. Well, they fixed it. Oh, I guess they kind of marked it right there. That's where the bullet hit. Bounced off the car and hit Reagan. But this car had quite a few. It has bulletproof glass. It has quite a few safety features. They kind of figured out after Kennedy that maybe they needed to do a better job of keeping the president from getting a cap popped in his ass. And I think Reagan was the last one to be injured. Had an assassination attempt on him. So apparently some of the security measures have worked because they went through a little run there. We'll start with Teddy Roosevelt, really. McKinley and Teddy Roosevelt of guys trying to kill the president. So anyway, that is the President's Cars exhibit. I'm sure I'll turn the camera back on over in here. There's a bunch of other cars over here. But for now, talk to you guys later.